from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. We are talking about the fight to preserve some of Nashville's most historic sites. And we have with us the board president for Historic Nashville, which has just released its list of 9 endangered locations. And so we'll go through those one by one, but happy to have with us Brian Mansfield. Brian, thank you for joining us via Zoom.
Thank you, Ben. Happy to be here.
I want to go through each one of these locations. We've seen this list of, the Nashville Nine, and we've done that before. And I'm fascinated by this every year and how you come to put something on this list. But let's step back for a moment and just big picture. How is Nashville doing with preserving its history? How do you think we're doing?
It's really hard to say because Nashville is a very unusual preservation market. I like to tell people that the notion of tearing buildings down and building bigger and newer ones is actually more deeply ingrained in this city's personality than country music is. Goes all the way back to Reconstruction. We've always wanted to be a bigger city than we were. Maybe only in the last 5 years have we really, as a city, gotten to the point where we can look around and go, okay, maybe this is about where we want to be. And so there is a real tendency in this town for 100 years or more of letting a building get to about 50 or 60 years old and going, yeah, we can do better than that, and building something and tearing it down and building something new. And if we're lucky, we just kind of build on top of it. But a lot of times we just level it and start over. And it makes preserving structures and historic places in this town very difficult. And right now the city is changing so fast. I don't think that anybody would say that we are doing an excellent job of preserving our city's history.
That's fascinating. This notion that we've always wanted to kind of punch above our weight. We've always had this complex of we want to be built, we want to be bigger than we are. And so now we are this city that's just booming. You look everywhere and we're growing. When you release a list like this, and I know Historic Nashville has done this for several years, are you seeing more support now than ever, or is it still pretty tough?
It's still pretty tough because Nashville tends to be a city that it's very creative. And so they're always looking to do new things, but they're often so busy focused on the next thing that we don't pay a lot of attention to what we've already done and taking care of that and preserving that. And it also tends to be a very business-friendly, very developer-friendly town because we want that growth, which is wonderful for our economic. We got a great economic foundation in this town because of that. But it does usually mean that developers get their way when they want to do something. And so a lot of times it's hard to get people in this city active and engaged until it's almost too late.
Wow. All right. As I said, board president, Historic Nashville. Now, you've been on all kinds of TV shows, and it's a nationally recognized expert on Nashville music and its history. You've appeared on 60 Minutes, all kinds of things. But what is, as we go through these individual locations that have been identified this year on the Nashville Nine, first of all, tell me, what is Historic Nashville?
Okay, Historic Nashville is a private nonprofit organization. A lot of people sometimes think we're a city organization, and we are not. We get confused with the Metro Historical Commission a lot, but we're a private nonprofit dedicated to preserving and advocating for historic sites in the city. And that has a number of different things that we do within that, but that's basically what we are.
And big picture, how did you come up with the 9 sites for this year?
Well, every year we open up a nominating process to our members and to the public at large and ask for their input We're always looking for places that are on the market, are underutilized, or just kind of sitting empty in some cases. And we're looking for the stories that are going on in town that suggest that a place could be neglected or threatened by development or endangered for some other reason. The last couple of years, for a variety of reasons, buildings have had damage done to them, both by people and by weather. So that was one of the things that we looked at this year. You know, we can point on this year's list. We can point to the Christmas Day bombings. We can point to the 2020 tornadoes. So the last couple of years have been kind of unusual because of those sorts of things, because we don't always get a lot of weather damage to the city. That has been different the last couple of years.
Oh, it sure has. Yeah. I mean, what a year this has been, and that is reflected in your list. And then one other just kind of set up question. You've done this list, Historic Nashville has, for several years.
Right.
When something goes on the list, let's look back, and I wish I'd done this, which I hadn't. Maybe you would know. You look at the list from 3 years ago, or even the list from last year. How often is something saved once it appears on your list? And how often is something lost? I mean, tragically. What impact does it have to be put on your list?
It basically brings new attention to a project that's going on. In fact, I think that's probably the best thing that we do with the Nashville Nine is there may be properties that people just didn't realize that was going on with that property, or that a particular property was so close to being lost entirely. I would say that the buildings we lose probably slightly outweigh the buildings that we save. And there are some buildings that just kind of drift along, and they could be on the Nashville Nine any number of years. We had one of the ones this year was actually on the list in 2014. It's still around, which is great. But the way the city is developing around that space suggests that it's probably in more danger than it was 7 years ago when it was on the list.
Fascinating. All right, now you have an order, and I'm gonna throw our producer for a loop here, and I'm not gonna take the first one. So the first four are kind of similar. I'm gonna go to number 6 on the list, Patton Brothers Funeral Home, 1306 South Street. And we may have a picture of that, but what is Patton Brothers Funeral Home? Why is it on this list?
Okay. Patton Brothers is one of the oldest, maybe the oldest Black-owned funeral home in the Middle Tennessee area. Its roots go back to the 19th century. It had been at the South Street location for, I think, something like 75 years. And the history of funeral homes on that site actually goes back even farther. And that building has a new owner, and so there is talk that could go away and a new development be put there. So there are a few sites on the list this year that we think are in danger of going away entirely. This is one of them. This is actually one of, and I had completely forgotten this, but back before Patton Brothers owned it, there was a guy named Zima Hill. He was a Baptist preacher in town in the Black community, and he was a really good marketer. And he went out and bought 4 stone polar bears. And he put 2 at the funeral home, and he put 2 at his house in Edge Hill. And that was part of the way that you knew the funeral home, because there were these 2 snowball throwing polar bears. And I had completely forgotten that Patton Brothers used to have 2 of the polar bears, because there were 4 in Nashville. 2 of them are pretty famous, the 2 that were at Zima Hill's home. The other 2, I'm not quite sure where they are now, but
absolutely,
it's one of the polar bear sites.
Yes, that's why I wanted to start with this one,
because
because
the polar bears.
Yeah, when I saw that, the polar bears, I was like, no way. So that's the origin of these polar bears, or they were at that house.
The origin of the polar bears was like a frozen custard stand that used to be on West End, and I think there was one out either on Gallatin Road or in Gallatin. And so when those went under, Zima bought the polar bears and moved two to his house and moved two to the funeral home.
Very interesting. Okay, so that is one that you're very concerned about. This Patton Brothers funeral home. You're worried that it could be gone, and so by putting it on the list, what do you hope happens?
We hope that the community kind of rises up, lets their political leaders, lets the developers, the new owners know whether or not they want to save it. And it may be that the community decides that that's not an important site to them. I think for the history of the city, it is an important site. But so we would like the community to make their wishes for the building and for the site known.
And one more before we go to break, and then we'll do some of the others. Number 8 on the list, the Woolworth Building, downtown, 221 Fifth Avenue North, the Woolworth Building. Why is it on the list?
This is a completely different situation than Patton Brothers. The Woolworth Building is not in any danger of being torn down. What's going on there, and this is one of the things that makes Nashville preservation unique, because so many times what's important about sites and buildings in Nashville is not necessarily the age or the architecture of the building like it is in a lot of cities that have strong preservation efforts. It's the stories that happened inside. And this is one of those. The building is more than 100 years old. It was a Woolworth five and dime for 80 or so years until the 1990s. But what people remember that for is the sit-ins. It was the focal point of the sit-ins in 1960. And so it is a key site in the civil rights story, not only of Nashville, but of the entire country. And a lot of the stuff that was in Woolworths at that time has been gone for years. When the restaurant Woolworths and Fifth went in a couple of years ago, they did a really good job of restoring what they could that was original, renovating to really emphasize that part of the building's history. And right now what's happening, the current occupants are planning on opening a theater there next year. And there is some concern that they are not taking the kind of care that the previous tenants did that really a site like that deserves. So our concern there is the interior of the building, not so much the exterior. And we would really like for them to have some preservation and civil rights and historic artifact experts work with them to make sure that they are taking proper care of the parts of that building that still tie to those 1960 events.
Critical building as far as the civil rights movement and its history here in Nashville. And you're just hoping that it isn't wiped away and turned into a movie theater, that there would be some aspect of this new development that kind of points back to the history, at least the interior part of that building points back to the history. Is that right?
Yes, and I know there will be some of that, but there is a way to do that preserves those things, and there's a way to do that maybe you don't even know if you don't have experience in that area. We just really are encouraging the current occupants to make sure that they're working with people that know what they're seeing when they see it.
Fascinating. Okay, so that sets the table for our discussion. We've hit on 2 of them, and others. Hold on the line, and we'll just open up the phone lines. If you want to call in, go ahead, call in right now, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587, and then we'll also go over the rest on this list. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.